Strong, sleek, and utterly devastating. Imagine a predator so perfectly engineered for killing that it ruled the oceans unchallenged for nearly 80 million years. A creature with jaws powerful enough to crush a car, teeth like serrated daggers, and a body built for explosive ambush attacks. This was the Pliosaur, the apex predator of prehistoric seas, a monster that made the ancient oceans a realm of terror. Today, we dive deep into the world of these magnificent beasts, exploring their biology, their hunting strategies, their evolution, and ultimately, their mysterious disappearance from the face of the earth. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. The story of the Pliosaur begins not in the ancient seas where they once hunted, but on the dramatic cliffs of the Jurassic coast in Dorset, England. In the winter of 2023, a discovery was made that would revolutionize our understanding of these ancient marine reptiles. After years of erosion gradually revealed its presence, paleontologists carefully extracted one of the most complete Pliosaur skulls ever discovered from the crumbling cliff face. The fossil had been entombed in rock for approximately 150 million years, a silent witness to an age when reptiles, not mammals, dominated both land and sea. The skull itself is a marvel of prehistoric engineering. Measuring approximately 2.4 meters in length, that's nearly 8 feet, this massive fossil represents just the head of an animal that likely measured between 10 and 12 meters from snout to tail. To put that in perspective, the skull alone is longer than most people are tall. When the full skeleton is considered, this individual Pliosaur would have been roughly the length of a bus, though far more streamlined and infinitely more dangerous. What makes this particular specimen so extraordinary is not merely its size, but its remarkable state of preservation. Many fossil skulls are crushed, distorted, or incomplete, their features obscured by millions of years of geological pressure. This specimen, however, retained its three-dimensional structure, allowing scientists to study the actual proportions and mechanics of the skull with unprecedented accuracy. Every ridge, every cavity, every tooth socket tells a story about how this animal lived, hunted, and dominated its environment. The teeth preserved in this skull are particularly impressive. Some exceed 8 centimeters in length, with sharp, serrated edges designed not just to puncture, but to saw through flesh and bone. The arrangement of these teeth reveals a sophisticated killing apparatus. The front teeth were slightly longer and more curved, ideal for gripping struggling prey, while the teeth further back in the jaw provided the cutting and crushing power needed to process large, tough-bodied animals. Unlike sharks, which continuously replace their teeth throughout their lives, pliosaurs replace their teeth more slowly, which meant each tooth was stronger and more deeply rooted in the jaw. Analysis of the bite mechanics of this skull has yielded astonishing results. Using computer modeling and comparing the skull structure to modern predators, scientists estimate that this pliosaur could generate a bite force exceeding 33,000 pounds per square inch. To understand just how powerful this is, consider that a Tyrannosaurus rex, long celebrated as having one of the most powerful bites in terrestrial history, likely generated around 12,000 pounds per square inch. A modern great white shark, itself a formidable predator, produces roughly 4,000 pounds per square inch. The pliosaur's bite force was in a league of its own, capable of crushing the bones of virtually any creature that shared its environment. But a powerful bite is only one component of a successful predator. The skull reveals other adaptations that made the pliosaur such an effective hunter. The eye sockets are remarkably large, suggesting enormous eyes capable of gathering light in the dim depths of the ocean. The positioning of these eyes, facing somewhat forward rather than strictly to the sides, indicates a degree of binocular vision. This would have allowed the pliosaur to judge distances with considerable accuracy, a crucial ability for a predator that relied on precisely timed ambush attacks. The snout region of the skull is particularly intriguing. Close examination reveals a network of small openings, called foramina, distributed across the surface of the bones. These openings are not random. They follow a distinct pattern that corresponds almost exactly to sensory systems seen in modern crocodilians. In living crocodiles and alligators, similar openings house specialized pressure sensors called integumentary sensory organs. These sensors can detect the subtlest changes in water pressure, allowing the animal to sense the movements of prey even in complete darkness or murky water. The presence of these foramina on the pliosaur skull suggests that this ancient predator possessed a similar sensory system. Imagine hunting in the dark waters hundreds of feet below the surface, where sunlight penetrates only weakly and visibility is measured in meters at best. A sensory system that could detect the pressure waves created by a swimming animal would provide an enormous advantage, effectively allowing the pliosaur to see its environment through touch at a distance. This adaptation would have made the pliosaur a devastating nocturnal hunter, capable of stalking prey that thought themselves hidden in the darkness. The discovery of this skull and the insights it provided sparked renewed interest in pliosaurs among paleontologists worldwide. But to truly understand these animals, we must look beyond a single specimen and examine the broader story of their evolution and diversification. The pliosaurs were not a single species, but rather an entire family of marine reptiles that evolved over millions of years, adapting to changing ocean conditions and diversifying into numerous distinct forms. The story of the pliosaurs begins in the early Jurassic period, approximately 200 million years ago. At this time, the world looked vastly different from today. The continents were still joined together in a single massive landmass called Pangaea, though this supercontinent was beginning to fracture. The climate was generally warm and humid, with no polar ice caps, and sea levels were high, creating extensive shallow seas that covered portions of what are now continental landmasses. It was in these warm, shallow seas that the ancestors of the pliosaurs first appeared. These early forms were not yet the massive, powerful predators that would later dominate the oceans. Instead, they were relatively small, perhaps 3 to 4 meters in length, with proportions that more closely resembled their ancestors. These ancestral marine reptiles had longer necks, smaller heads, and were likely less specialized for active predation. They probably fed on fish and smaller marine animals, using their speed and agility rather than overwhelming power to capture prey. Understanding what pliosaurs were requires first understanding what they were not. Despite living in the ocean and often being called sea monsters, pliosaurs were not fish, not dinosaurs, and not even closely related to modern marine mammals like whales and dolphins. They were reptiles, members of a group called Sauropterygia, which includes several families of marine reptiles that evolved during the Mesozoic era. This group represents one of several independent evolutionary experiments in which land-dwelling reptiles returned to the sea, adapting their bodies for an aquatic lifestyle. The transition from land to sea is one of the most dramatic transformations in evolutionary history. It requires wholesale restructuring of virtually every body system. Limbs that evolved for walking must be modified into flippers for swimming. Lungs must be adapted to allow for extended breath holding. Sensory systems tuned for air must be recalibrated for water. The skeleton must be restructured to support the body in a three-dimensional fluid environment rather than against the constant downward pull of gravity on land. And all of this must happen gradually, through incremental changes, each of which must provide some survival advantage. The pliosaurs' ancestors accomplished this transition remarkably well. By the early Jurassic, they had already developed the basic body plan that would characterize the group: 4 flippers, a streamlined body, and adaptations for marine hunting. But the true pliosaurs, the massive apex predators that would later dominate the oceans, had not yet evolved. That transformation would require millions more years of evolution, driven by changing environmental conditions and evolutionary arms races with their prey. The Middle Jurassic period, spanning from approximately 174 to 163 million years ago, saw the beginning of the pliosaurs' rise to dominance. During this time, the world's oceans were becoming deeper and more complex. The breakup of Pangaea was well underway, creating new ocean basins and altering circulation patterns. These changes created new ecological opportunities for marine predators. Fossil evidence from this period shows pliosaurs beginning to increase in size and modify their body proportions. The neck became shorter and more muscular. The skull grew larger relative to body size. The flippers became more powerful and more specialized for generating thrust. These changes reflect a fundamental shift in hunting strategy, from pursuit predation to ambush predation, from agility to power. Why would such a shift occur? The answer lies in the prey available in the Jurassic oceans. The seas of this time were filled with large, heavily built marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs, which resembled dolphins but were actually reptiles, could reach considerable size and were fast swimmers. Plesiosaurs, close relatives of the pliosaurs, were abundant, and some species grew to substantial dimensions. There were also large fish, marine crocodilians, and various other prey animals. Many of these creatures were too large or too fast to be reliably caught through extended pursuit, but they could be ambushed. Ambush predation requires different physical attributes than pursuit predation. An ambush predator doesn't need sustained swimming speed or exceptional maneuverability. What it needs is explosive acceleration over short distances, overwhelming power to quickly subdue prey before it can escape, and sensory systems capable of detecting and tracking prey while remaining hidden. Over millions of years of evolution, the pliosaurs developed all of these characteristics. The shortened neck was a crucial adaptation. A long neck, like those retained by the plesiosaurs, provides flexibility and reach, useful for pursuing fish and small prey. But a long neck is also a structural weakness. It's vulnerable to injury and generates significant drag when swimming at high speed. A short, muscular neck, by contrast, is much stronger. It can absorb the tremendous forces generated when massive jaws slam shut on struggling prey. It reduces drag, allowing for faster acceleration, and it brings the powerful jaw muscles closer to the body's center of mass, improving overall hydrodynamic efficiency. The flippers of pliosaurs were engineering marvels in their own right. Unlike fish, which propel themselves primarily through side-to-side movements of their tail, pliosaurs used their four flippers in a swimming motion somewhat analogous to underwater flight. This method of propulsion, called paraxial swimming, is also used by modern sea turtles, sea lions, and penguins. It's highly efficient and allows for excellent maneuverability and precise control of position in the water. But the pliosaur flippers were specialized beyond what we see in these modern animals. They were enormous, sometimes exceeding 2 meters in length. The bones within the flippers show adaptations for withstanding tremendous forces. The joints between the flipper bones allowed for a complex range of motion, enabling the pliosaur to adjust the angle and orientation of its flippers to generate thrust in multiple directions. Computer simulations of pliosaur swimming suggest that they could accelerate extremely rapidly from a stationary position, reaching significant speed within just a few powerful strokes. This ability to accelerate rapidly was essential to the pliosaur's hunting strategy. Imagine the scene in a Jurassic ocean. A pliosaur hangs motionless in the water column, perhaps 50 meters below the surface. Above, silhouetted against the brighter surface waters, a school of large fish or a passing ichthyosaur presents an opportunity. The pliosaur's large eyes track the target, judging distance and trajectory. The pressure sensors in its snout detect the subtle water movements created by the prey's swimming motions. At the optimal moment, the pliosaur strikes. The massive flippers begin their power stroke, each one biting into the water and generating enormous thrust. The streamlined body accelerates upward, quickly building speed. The prey, if it detects the threat at all, has only seconds to react, but escape is nearly impossible. The pliosaur closes the distance with shocking speed, and those massive jaws open wide. The prey is seized in a grip that generates tons of force. Teeth puncture flesh, vertebrae, and bone. The struggle is brief. Another successful hunt by the ocean's supreme predator. This hunting strategy explains many of the pliosaur's physical characteristics. The large eyes and sensitive snout allowed it to detect prey from a considerable distance in the dim depths. The powerful flippers and streamlined body provided the acceleration needed for ambush attacks. The massive jaws and powerful bite ensured that prey, once caught, had virtually no chance of escape. Every aspect of the pliosaur's anatomy was optimized for this style of hunting. But evolution doesn't occur in isolation. As pliosaurs evolved to become more effective predators, their prey was also evolving. This created an evolutionary arms race, with each improvement in predatory ability met by corresponding improvements in prey defenses. This dynamic interaction drove increasing specialization on both sides, pushing the pliosaur lineage toward ever greater size and power. By the late Jurassic period, approximately 155 to 145 million years ago, several distinct lineages of large pliosaurs had emerged. Each of these lineages represents a separate evolutionary experiment, a different solution to the challenge of being an apex predator in the Mesozoic oceans. Understanding the diversity within the pliosaur family helps us appreciate the complexity of ancient marine ecosystems and the various ecological roles these predators filled. One of the most famous pliosaur genera is Liopleurodon, primarily known from fossils found in England and France. Liopleurodon has achieved considerable fame, partly due to its appearance in popular documentaries and partly due to some exaggerated claims about its size. Early estimates suggested that Liopleurodon could reach lengths of 25 meters or more, making it one of the largest predators ever to exist. However, more recent and careful analysis of the fossil evidence suggests that these estimates were significantly inflated. Most Liopleurodon specimens indicate animals in the 6 to 7 meter range, with the largest possibly reaching 10 to 12 meters. Even at these more conservative size estimates, Liopleurodon was a formidable predator. Its skull could exceed 1.5 meters in length, filled with sharp teeth perfectly designed for gripping slippery prey. The body was powerfully built, with enormous flippers capable of generating significant thrust. Liopleurodon likely hunted in the relatively shallow seas that covered much of Europe during the late Jurassic, preying on large fish, squid, and other marine reptiles. The fossils of Liopleurodon have been found in marine deposits that also contain abundant remains of its potential prey. These deposits reveal a rich and diverse ecosystem, with numerous species of fish, ammonites, belemnites, extinct squid-like creatures, and other marine reptiles. Some of the other marine reptile fossils show bite marks that match the teeth of Liopleurodon, providing direct evidence of predation. In one particularly striking example, a partial skeleton of a long-necked plesiosaur was found with Liopleurodon teeth embedded in its bones, a frozen moment from a hunt that took place 150 million years ago. Another important pliosaur genus is Kronosaurus, known primarily from fossils found in Australia and Colombia. Kronosaurus lived during the early Cretaceous period, roughly 120 to 100 million years ago. This was somewhat later than Liopleurodon, and by this time, the world's geography and ocean systems had changed considerably. Australia, which had been part of the southern supercontinent of Gondwana, was beginning to separate and drift northward, though it was still much farther south than its current position. Kronosaurus was a giant even among pliosaurs. The most complete specimen discovered in Queensland, Australia, suggests a total length of around 9 to 10 meters, with some estimates pushing slightly higher. The skull alone measured approximately 3 meters in length, making it one of the largest skulls of any marine reptile. The teeth were proportionally massive, some exceeding 12 centimeters in length. These were not delicate precision instruments, they were tools for massive destruction. The environment in which Kronosaurus lived was quite different from the European seas inhabited by Liopleurodon. The Australian fossils come from what was once a vast inland sea, the Eromanga Sea, which covered much of central Australia during the Cretaceous period. This sea was relatively shallow and warm, with conditions somewhat similar to the modern Gulf of Mexico or Caribbean Sea. The fauna of this sea included numerous species of fish, sharks, sea turtles, and other marine reptiles, providing ample prey for a massive predator like Kronosaurus. Interestingly, Kronosaurus fossils have also been found in South America, specifically in Colombia. This distribution makes sense when we consider the geography of the Cretaceous world. South America and Australia, along with Antarctica, were all part of Gondwana and were connected by ocean currents and migration routes. The presence of closely related pliosaurs on both continents suggests that these animals were capable of long-distance movement through the oceans, perhaps following prey migrations or seeking new hunting grounds. The discovery of Kronosaurus and other southern hemisphere pliosaurs challenged the notion that these predators were restricted to the northern oceans. It became clear that pliosaurs had achieved a nearly global distribution, inhabiting oceans from the Arctic to the Antarctic. This worldwide presence speaks to the evolutionary success of the pliosaur body plan and hunting strategy. Wherever there were large marine animals to hunt, pliosaurs could thrive. Yet another notable genus is Pliosaurus itself, the name bearer of the family. Several species have been assigned to this genus, found primarily in European and Russian deposits dating to the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous periods. Pliosaurus funke, discovered in Svalbard, Norway, is one of the most completely known species. This animal lived approximately 145 million years ago in the cold, dark waters of the northern seas. The environment inhabited by Pliosaurus funke would have been challenging. The high latitude meant extended periods of darkness during winter months, and water temperatures, while warmer than today's Arctic seas, were still cool. Yet Pliosaurus thrived in these conditions. The large eyes, sophisticated sensory systems, and powerful build allowed it to hunt effectively even in low-light conditions. Fossil evidence from the same deposits includes remains of ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs that likely served as prey. The Pliosaurus funke specimen is particularly important because it includes portions of the skeleton beyond just the skull, providing insights into the complete anatomy and proportions of this species. Analysis of the flipper bones reveals the tremendous forces these structures could generate. The vertebrae show adaptations for flexibility in some regions of the spine and rigidity in others, allowing for the precise combination of stability and maneuverability needed for effective hunting. These various genera, Liopleurodon, Kronosaurus, Pliosaurus, and others, represent the diversity within the pliosaur family. But they all share fundamental characteristics: large size, massive skulls with powerful jaws, shortened necks, streamlined bodies, and specialized flippers. These shared features reflect shared evolutionary pressures, the common challenges faced by large marine predators in the Mesozoic seas. Understanding how pliosaurs grew to such enormous sizes requires examining the mechanics of growth and development in these animals. Like all reptiles, pliosaurs hatched from eggs, though whether they laid their eggs on land like sea turtles or gave birth to live young in the water like some modern sea snakes remains uncertain. The fossil record preserves very few juvenile pliosaurs, which makes reconstructing their early life history challenging. The few juvenile specimens that have been found suggest that young pliosaurs were considerably smaller than adults as expected, but were already well adapted for marine life. Even the smallest juveniles show the characteristic shortened neck and large head of the group, suggesting that the basic body plan was established very early in development. This differs from some modern animals, like humans, where body proportions change dramatically during growth. Growth in reptiles is typically indeterminate, meaning that they continue to grow throughout their lives, though the rate of growth slows with age. This pattern likely applied to pliosaurs as well. Young animals would have grown rapidly, requiring enormous amounts of food to fuel their increasing body mass. As they matured and growth slowed, their food requirements would have stabilized, though an adult pliosaur would still have needed to consume substantial quantities of prey to maintain its massive body. The largest pliosaurs probably didn't reach their full size until they were several decades old. Growth rings in bones, similar to tree rings, can sometimes be used to estimate age in fossil reptiles, though this technique is complicated by various factors. Based on comparisons with modern reptiles and the limited data from fossil bones, scientists estimate that the largest pliosaurs may have lived for 50 years or more, possibly considerably longer. This long lifespan would have important ecological implications. A large, long-lived predator has different effects on ecosystem dynamics than a smaller, short-lived one. Long-lived predators can regulate prey populations over extended periods, potentially promoting greater stability in the ecosystem. However, they also tend to reproduce more slowly, which can make them vulnerable to environmental changes that reduce prey availability or increase mortality rates. The question of pliosaur reproduction is one of the most intriguing and poorly understood aspects of their biology. As mentioned earlier, we don't know for certain whether they laid eggs or gave birth to live young. Most modern reptiles lay eggs, but there are notable exceptions. Some snakes and lizards give birth to live young, and this trait has evolved independently multiple times in different reptile lineages. In a marine environment, live birth has obvious advantages, as it eliminates the need to come ashore to lay eggs, a dangerous and energy-intensive process for a large, fully aquatic animal. The ichthyosaurs, which were not closely related to pliosaurs but shared a similar marine lifestyle, definitely gave birth to live young. Several remarkable fossils have been discovered showing female ichthyosaurs in the process of giving birth, with the partially emerged infant preserved in the fossil. If pliosaurs employed a similar reproductive strategy, we might expect to eventually find comparable fossils, though none have been discovered to date. If pliosaurs did give birth to live young, the size of the newborns would have been substantial. A baby pliosaur born from a mother 10 or 12 meters long might itself have been 1 or 2 meters in length. These youngsters would have been vulnerable to predation from other marine reptiles and large fish, but their size would have limited the range of potential predators. As they grew, they would have progressively moved up the food chain, initially feeding on smaller prey items and gradually taking on larger and more challenging quarry. The social behavior of pliosaurs is another area where we can only speculate based on limited evidence. Most modern large marine predators are solitary, coming together only to mate. Great white sharks, for instance, typically hunt alone, as do most species of large predatory fish. However, some marine predators do exhibit social behavior. Certain species of dolphins hunt cooperatively, and there is evidence that some extinct marine reptiles may have done so as well. A few fossil sites have yielded multiple pliosaur individuals in relatively close proximity, which could indicate social aggregations. However, these accumulations could also result from other factors, such as multiple individuals being washed into the same area after death or being attracted to the same rich feeding grounds at different times. Without more definitive evidence, such as fossil sites showing multiple individuals preserved in the act of cooperative hunting, we cannot say with certainty whether pliosaurs were social or solitary. The sensory world of the pliosaur was likely quite different from our own. We've already discussed their large eyes and pressure-sensitive snout, but other sensory systems also merit consideration. Hearing, for instance, was probably important for these animals. Sound travels well through water, often better than through air, and many modern marine animals rely heavily on acoustic information. The structure of the pliosaur skull includes features associated with sound detection. The stapes, a small bone involved in hearing, is preserved in some specimens and shows adaptations for detecting underwater sounds. The size and shape of the ear opening and associated structures suggest that pliosaurs could probably detect a range of frequencies, including the low-frequency sounds that travel longest distances through water. The sense of smell in pliosaurs is harder to evaluate. On land, smell involves detecting airborne chemical molecules. Underwater, the equivalent sense is better described as taste or chemoreception, detecting chemicals dissolved in water. Many modern marine animals have highly developed chemoreceptive abilities, using them to detect prey, predators, and potential mates over considerable distances. Sharks, for example, can detect minute concentrations of blood in the water. The internal structure of the pliosaur skull includes cavities and passages that likely housed olfactory or chemoreceptive organs, though the exact capabilities of these organs are impossible to determine from fossils alone. By analogy with modern marine predators, it seems likely that pliosaurs could detect chemical cues in the water, adding another tool to their sensory arsenal for locating prey. All of these sensory systems, vision, pressure detection, hearing, and chemoreception, would have worked together to create a detailed perception of the pliosaur's environment. In the murky, dim waters of the deep ocean, a multi-sensory approach would have been essential for successful hunting. Each sense could compensate for the limitations of the others, creating a robust and reliable system for detecting and tracking prey under a wide range of conditions. The ocean environment inhabited by pliosaurs was vastly different from modern seas in many ways beyond just the different cast of inhabitants. The chemistry of the water itself was different. Ocean temperatures were generally warmer, even at high latitudes and in the deep sea. There were no polar ice caps for most of the Mesozoic era, and the temperature gradient from equator to poles was less steep than today. This affected ocean circulation patterns, nutrient distribution, and the overall productivity of marine ecosystems. The composition of the atmosphere was also different, with carbon dioxide levels generally higher than today and oxygen levels fluctuating over time. During parts of the Mesozoic, ocean oxygen levels dropped significantly in some regions, creating extensive zones of oxygen-depleted water. These anoxic zones would have been inhospitable to most large animals, potentially constraining the distribution of pliosaurs and their prey to well-oxygenated surface waters in certain coastal regions. Sea level was considerably higher during much of the Mesozoic era. The lack of polar ice caps meant that more of Earth's water was in liquid form in the oceans rather than locked up in ice sheets. Additionally, the ocean floor spreading that accompanied the breakup of Pangaea created new, young oceanic crust, which sits higher than older crust, displacing water upward. The combination of these factors meant that shallow seas covered vast areas of the continents, creating extensive epicontinental seaways. These shallow seas were likely prime hunting grounds for pliosaurs. The relatively shallow water would have been well lit and highly productive, supporting abundant populations of fish and other prey animals. The complex underwater topography, with submerged ridges, valleys, and islands, would have created diverse habitats and hunting opportunities. Many of the best pliosaur fossil sites are found in sediments deposited in these ancient shallow seas, suggesting that these were indeed favored habitats for these predators. The global distribution of pliosaurs also reflected the geography of the Mesozoic world. During the Jurassic and early Cretaceous periods, the continents were arranged very differently than today. The Atlantic Ocean was just beginning to open and was much narrower than at present. The Americas were still separating from Europe and Africa. India was an island continent moving northward toward Asia. Antarctica was ice-free and connected to South America and Australia. These geographical arrangements created ocean circulation patterns quite different from those of today. Without the Southern Ocean circling Antarctica as it does now, the flow of cold water around the pole was prevented, contributing to the generally warm global climate. The Tethys Ocean, a vast sea that separated the northern and southern continents, stretched from what is now the Mediterranean region eastward to the Pacific, creating a vast tropical ocean that likely supported enormous populations of marine life, including pliosaurs. The food web supporting pliosaurs would have been complex and extensive. At the base were photosynthetic organisms, marine algae and photosynthetic bacteria, that converted sunlight into biological energy. These were consumed by zooplankton, small drifting animals that included the larvae of many species. The zooplankton, in turn, fed small fish and other small predators. These were eaten by larger fish, which fell prey to still larger predators, creating a chain that eventually led to the pliosaurs at the apex, but this is a simplified view. Real marine food webs are much more complex, with multiple trophic levels, omnivores that feed at multiple levels, scavengers that recycle organic matter, and complex interactions between species. Pliosaurs would have been part of this intricate network, both shaping it through their predation and being shaped by it in their evolution and ecology. Competition between pliosaurs and other large marine predators would have been significant. Other large marine reptiles, particularly the ichthyosaurs and the long-necked plesiosaurs, shared the oceans with pliosaurs. Large sharks were also present, though they had not yet evolved into the massive forms seen later in the Cenozoic era. Each of these groups had their own adaptations and hunting strategies, and there would have been both competition and niche partitioning among them. Ichthyosaurs, with their streamlined, dolphin-like bodies, were faster swimmers than pliosaurs and likely pursued different prey. They were pursuit predators, chasing down fast-moving squid and fish. Pliosaurs, with their ambush strategy, would have targeted different prey or hunted the same prey in different ways. This difference in hunting strategies would have reduced direct competition, allowing both groups to coexist in the same general environment. The long-necked plesiosaurs present an interesting case. Some species of plesiosaurs grew quite large, and there is evidence that pliosaurs preyed upon them. Fossils of plesiosaurs with pliosaur tooth marks, and even with pliosaur teeth embedded in their bones, provide direct evidence of this predator-prey relationship. Yet pliosaurs and plesiosaurs were closely related, both being members of the group Sauropterygia. This suggests that the evolution of the short-necked, large-headed pliosaur form from longer-necked ancestors may have been driven partly by the opportunity to prey upon their own relatives. This pattern, predators evolving to exploit their own relatives as prey, is not uncommon in evolution. It represents a form of niche partitioning where different members of a closely related group evolve different lifestyles and feeding strategies, reducing competition between them. The result is greater diversity within the group and more efficient use of available resources. The impact of pliosaurs on their ecosystems would have been substantial. As apex predators, they would have influenced the population dynamics of their prey species, potentially regulating those populations and preventing any single prey species from becoming overwhelmingly dominant. This regulatory effect can have cascading impacts throughout the food web, affecting species several steps removed from the predator. Ecologists call this a trophic cascade. In modern ecosystems, the removal of apex predators often leads to dramatic changes in community structure. When wolves were eliminated from Yellowstone National Park, deer populations exploded, leading to overgrazing of vegetation, which in turn affected numerous other species. When wolves were later reintroduced, these effects were reversed. Similar dynamics likely operated in Mesozoic marine ecosystems, with pliosaurs playing a key role in maintaining ecological balance. The fossil record occasionally provides glimpses of these ancient ecological interactions. Sites where numerous different species are preserved together can reveal the structure of ancient communities. The relative abundance of different species, the size distributions, and evidence of predation such as bite marks or gut contents all contribute to our understanding of how these ecosystems functioned. One particularly informative type of fossil evidence is the coprolite, fossilized feces. Coprolites can contain remains of prey items, providing direct evidence of diet. Several coprolites attributed to pliosaurs have been found, containing bones and scales of fish, as well as fragments of other marine reptiles. The size of these coprolites is impressive, some exceeding 30 centimeters in length, testament to the massive digestive system required to process the large quantities of food consumed by these predators. Another source of information about pliosaur diet comes from gastroliths, stomach stones. Some modern animals, particularly birds and crocodilians, deliberately swallow stones that sit in the stomach or gizzard and help grind up food. Gastroliths have been found associated with some pliosaur skeletons, though their purpose is debated. In a marine predator with sharp teeth designed for gripping rather than chewing, gastroliths might have aided in breaking down food. Alternatively, they might have served as ballast, helping the animal control its buoyancy in the water column. The question of buoyancy is an interesting one for marine reptiles. Modern marine mammals like whales and dolphins have evolved various adaptations for managing buoyancy, including specialized fat deposits and control over the amount of air in their lungs. Marine reptiles, which also breathed air, would have faced similar challenges. Too much buoyancy would make it difficult to dive and stay submerged. Too little would require constant swimming effort to avoid sinking. Pliosaurs likely managed their buoyancy through a combination of methods. Dense bones would have provided negative buoyancy, helping them stay submerged. The amount of air in the lungs could be regulated, providing variable buoyancy control. The large, oil-rich liver found in many modern sharks, which provides buoyancy control, might have had an equivalent in pliosaurs, though soft tissues like livers don't fossilize, so we can't know for certain. The mechanics of breathing would have been crucial for pliosaurs. As air-breathing reptiles, they would have needed to surface regularly to breathe, much like modern whales and dolphins. The frequency of breathing would have depended on activity level, water temperature, and body size. A large pliosaur, with its low surface area to volume ratio, would have had lower metabolic demands per unit of body mass than a smaller animal, and might have been able to hold its breath for extended periods while resting or cruising slowly. However, active hunting would have dramatically increased oxygen demand. The explosive burst of speed needed for an ambush attack would have been primarily powered by anaerobic metabolism, energy production without oxygen. This is the same system that powers a sprinter's 100-meter dash or a weightlifter's single maximum lift. It can generate enormous power very quickly, but only for short periods, and it produces lactic acid as a byproduct, which causes muscle fatigue. After an intense burst of activity, a pliosaur would have needed to surface and breathe rapidly to repay the oxygen debt and clear lactic acid from its muscles. This recovery period might have lasted several minutes, during which the animal would have been less capable of another maximum effort. This physiological reality would have influenced hunting behavior, potentially limiting the number of attacks a pliosaur could make in quick succession and favoring a hunting strategy that maximized the chances of success on the first attempt. The structure of the pliosaur's respiratory system would have been adapted to facilitate rapid gas exchange when breathing. The lungs were likely large and efficient, possibly with a complex internal structure that increased surface area for gas exchange. The ribs and associated muscles would have been powerful, capable of rapidly ventilating the lungs. The nostrils were positioned on the top of the snout, allowing the animal to breathe while barely breaking the surface, minimizing the disruption of the smooth, streamlined profile that was so important for hydrodynamic efficiency. This brings us to another crucial aspect of pliosaur biology: thermoregulation. Reptiles are often called cold-blooded, but this is somewhat misleading. A more accurate term is ectothermic, meaning that they rely primarily on external sources of heat to regulate their body temperature, rather than generating heat metabolically as endothermic animals like mammals and birds do. However, this doesn't mean that all reptiles have low or variable body temperatures. Many modern reptiles, particularly large ones, maintain relatively stable body temperatures through behavioral means. Large sea turtles, for instance, maintain body temperatures several degrees above the water temperature through a combination of their large size, which resists temperature change, and strategic use of different water depths with different temperatures. Some large predatory fish, particularly certain sharks and tunas, have evolved a form of regional endothermy, keeping their swimming muscles and brain warm through metabolic heat generation and specialized circulatory systems that retain heat. The question of pliosaur thermoregulation has been debated among paleontologists. Their large size would have provided considerable thermal inertia, resistance to temperature change. A multi-ton animal would heat up and cool down slowly, maintaining a relatively stable temperature even if the environment fluctuated. Additionally, the active lifestyle of a pliosaur, with bursts of intense activity during hunting, would have generated metabolic heat. If pliosaurs had any adaptations for retaining this heat, such as countercurrent heat exchangers in their circulatory system, they might have maintained body temperatures significantly above water temperature. Why does this matter? Body temperature affects the rate of biochemical reactions, including those that power muscle contraction. Warmer muscles contract faster and more powerfully than cooler ones. If pliosaurs could maintain warm muscles, they would have had a significant performance advantage, particularly in cooler waters. This might explain how species like Pliosaurus funke could thrive in the relatively cold waters of the northern seas. However, maintaining a high body temperature requires energy, and that energy must come from food. An endothermic or partially endothermic pliosaur would have needed to consume more prey than a fully ectothermic one. The rich marine ecosystems of the Mesozoic might have provided sufficient prey to support this higher metabolic demand, but it remains an open question whether pliosaurs were indeed partially endothermic, or whether they relied entirely on their large size and behavioral choices to manage their body temperature. The biomechanics of pliosaur movement has been extensively studied using modern computational methods. By creating detailed three-dimensional models of pliosaur skeletons and simulating the action of muscles and the physics of water flow, researchers can test hypotheses about how these animals swam. These studies have revealed that pliosaur locomotion was quite sophisticated. The four-flipper swimming style used by pliosaurs is rare in modern animals, but offers several advantages. By using all four flippers in a coordinated rowing motion, a pliosaur could generate thrust throughout the entire stroke cycle, unlike animals that use only a tail for propulsion, which generate thrust primarily during the power stroke. This continuous thrust production would have provided excellent acceleration and fine control over speed and direction. The front and rear flippers likely played somewhat different roles. Computer simulations suggest that the front flippers provided most of the thrust and were primarily responsible for controlling pitch, the up and down orientation of the body. The rear flippers provided additional thrust and were important for controlling yaw, the left-right orientation. Together, the four flippers gave the pliosaur three-dimensional maneuverability that would have been essential for tracking and catching agile prey. The flexibility of the body also played a role in locomotion. While the shortened neck of pliosaurs reduced overall flexibility compared to their longer-necked relatives, the rest of the spine retained considerable flexibility. This allowed the body to undulate slightly during swimming, adding to the thrust generated by the flippers and improving efficiency. The tail, while not the primary propulsive organ as it is in fish, could be used for additional thrust and for steering, particularly during rapid turns. Turning performance would have been crucial for a predator that relied on surprise and speed to catch prey. A pliosaur accelerating upward toward a target would need to be able to adjust its trajectory if the prey took evasive action. The large flippers, positioned well away from the body's center of mass, could generate substantial turning moments, rotational forces, allowing for rapid changes in direction. However, the large body mass and forward momentum would have limited turning radius. A pliosaur probably couldn't match the agility of smaller, more flexible animals, which is why the ambush strategy, which minimizes the need for pursuit and maneuvering, was so effective. The hydrodynamic efficiency of the pliosaur body has also been analyzed. Water is much denser and more viscous than air, which means that drag forces are much more significant for swimming animals than for terrestrial ones. Minimizing drag is crucial for any animal that needs to move quickly through water. The pliosaur body shows numerous adaptations for reducing drag. The streamlined profile, tapering toward both ends, minimizes form drag, resistance caused by the body's shape pushing water aside. The smooth, scale-covered skin would have reduced friction drag, the resistance caused by water flowing along the body's surface. The positioning of the flippers and their ability to fold somewhat against the body when not actively swimming would have further reduced drag during gliding or slow swimming. Despite these adaptations, a large pliosaur would still have experienced substantial drag forces, particularly when swimming at high speed. Overcoming this drag would have required tremendous power from the swimming muscles, which explains why pliosaur skeletons show such robust attachment points for these muscles. The muscles themselves would have been massive, probably constituting a substantial portion of the animal's total body mass. The energy cost of swimming would have been high, particularly during rapid acceleration and high-speed swimming. This energy had to come from food, which brings us back to the question of diet and feeding rates. How much did a pliosaur need to eat, and how often would it need to hunt successfully to meet its metabolic needs? This question is difficult to answer precisely, but we can make estimates based on comparisons with modern animals and calculations based on body size and activity level. A 10-meter pliosaur might have weighed 5 to 10 tons, depending on body proportions and density. If it had a metabolic rate similar to modern large ectothermic reptiles, it might have required about 1 to 3% of its body weight in food per week. This would translate to 50 to 300 kilograms of prey per week, or perhaps the equivalent of one large prey animal every week or two. However, if pliosaurs had elevated metabolic rates, either due to partial endothermy or simply high activity levels, their food requirements could have been significantly higher. An endothermic animal of similar size might require 10% of its body weight in food per week or more. The actual requirements for pliosaurs probably fell somewhere between these extremes, but without living specimens to study, we can't be certain. What we can say is that pliosaurs needed productive hunting grounds with abundant prey to support their large size and active lifestyle. The distribution of pliosaur fossils supports this conclusion. Most specimens come from areas that were, during the Mesozoic, shallow seas with high biological productivity. These were the environments where prey would have been most abundant and where pliosaurs could hunt most successfully. The death and fossilization of pliosaurs provides another window into their biology and ecology. Fossilization is a rare event, requiring specific conditions to preserve organic remains before they decay or are destroyed by scavengers. The fact that we have as many pliosaur fossils as we do, including some spectacularly complete specimens, tells us something about the circumstances of their death and the environments they inhabited. Many pliosaur fossils are found in fine-grained marine sediments, such as shales and mudstones, that were deposited in relatively quiet water conditions. These sediments preserve detail particularly well, sometimes including impressions of soft tissues or even chemical signatures of organic molecules. The quiet water conditions necessary for these sediments to accumulate suggest protected marine environments, perhaps lagoons or the deeper parts of epicontinental seas, where storm-driven currents and wave action were limited. This continues in Part 2, which will explore the later evolution of pliosaurs, their interactions with changing environments, competing predators, and ultimately their extinction, along with detailed examinations of specific fossil sites, recent discoveries, and what the study of these magnificent predators tells us about evolution, ecology, and the impermanence of even the most successful life forms. The accumulation of pliosaur fossils in particular locations provides insight into both the death of individual animals and the broader patterns of Mesozoic marine ecosystems. Some fossil sites contain multiple pliosaur specimens, sometimes of different ages and sizes. These accumulations raise interesting questions about whether they represent catastrophic mortality events that killed multiple animals simultaneously, or whether they simply reflect favorable preservation conditions that accumulated remains over extended periods. One possibility is that certain locations served as particularly favorable habitats for pliosaurs, attracting many individuals over time. When these animals died, whether from old age, disease, injury, or other causes, their bodies would have settled to the seafloor in these areas. If conditions were right for preservation, fine sediments accumulating steadily, low oxygen levels that discouraged scavengers and bacteria, multiple individuals could be fossilized in the same general area even though they died at different times. Another scenario involves seasonal aggregations. Many modern marine animals gather in specific locations at certain times of year, often related to reproduction or taking advantage of seasonal prey abundance. If pliosaurs exhibited similar behavior, there might have been times and places where population density was unusually high. A catastrophic event during such an aggregation, a sudden drop in oxygen levels, a toxic algal bloom, or even volcanic activity, could have killed multiple animals simultaneously, creating a mass mortality deposit. The condition of individual fossils also provides clues about what happened after death. Some pliosaur skeletons are found largely complete and articulated, meaning the bones remained connected roughly as they were in life. This suggests relatively rapid burial, which protected the carcass from being scattered by currents or torn apart by scavengers. Other specimens are disarticulated, with bones scattered across an area, indicating that the carcass spent time on the seafloor before burial, allowing it to be pulled apart by scavengers or currents. Bite marks on pliosaur bones, including teeth marks from other pliosaurs, indicate that scavenging and possibly cannibalism occurred. This shouldn't be surprising. Modern predators frequently scavenge dead animals, including members of their own species. A dead pliosaur would have represented an enormous quantity of food, potentially attracting numerous scavengers. The largest and most dominant predators in the area, quite possibly other pliosaurs, would have had first access to this resource. Some of the most fascinating pliosaur fossils are those that preserve evidence of injury or disease. Several specimens show healed fractures, indicating that these animals could survive significant trauma. Rib fractures, broken flippers, and even damage to jaw bones have been documented. The healing of these injuries demonstrates that pliosaurs had robust immune systems and effective wound healing mechanisms, allowing them to recover from injuries that might have been fatal to less resilient animals. One particularly striking specimen shows evidence of a severe infection in the jaw. The bone is distorted and shows abnormal growth patterns consistent with a chronic infection, possibly caused by an injury or a broken tooth. This individual apparently lived with this condition for some time, as the bone remodeling indicates an extended healing process. Eventually, however, the infection may have contributed to the animal's death, either directly or by impairing its ability to feed effectively. The presence of pathologies like these in the fossil record reminds us that pliosaurs, despite being apex predators, were not invulnerable. They faced the same challenges as all living organisms: injury, disease, parasites, and the inevitable decline of old age. Even the most powerful predator eventually succumbs to these forces, and the fossil record preserves occasional glimpses of these struggles. Parasites are particularly difficult to detect in fossils, as they rarely preserve directly. However, indirect evidence of parasitism can sometimes be found. Abnormal bone growth patterns might indicate chronic irritation from parasites embedded in tissues. Some modern marine reptiles, particularly sea turtles, host numerous parasites, including various worms, crustaceans, and other organisms. Pliosaurs likely had their own suite of parasites, though the specific organisms involved are lost to time. The chemistry preserved in pliosaur fossils can provide additional information about their biology. Isotope analysis, which examines the ratios of different forms of elements like carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, can reveal information about diet, habitat, and even body temperature. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes reflect dietary preferences and position in the food web. Oxygen isotopes can indicate the temperature of the water in which the animal lived, and in some cases, provide clues about body temperature if the animal was capable of elevating its temperature above that of the surrounding water. Studies using these methods have confirmed that pliosaurs were indeed apex predators, occupying the highest trophic levels in their ecosystems. The isotopic signatures match what we would expect for animals feeding on large prey items like other marine reptiles and large fish. Interestingly, some studies have found differences in isotopic signatures between individual pliosaurs from the same time and place, suggesting that different individuals might have had somewhat different dietary preferences or hunted in slightly different microhabitats. Temperature-related isotopic studies have produced intriguing but not yet definitive results. Some analyses suggest that at least some pliosaurs maintain body temperatures a few degrees above the ambient water temperature, which would be consistent with gigantothermy, the maintenance of elevated body temperature through large body size and metabolic heat production. However, these results are debated, as various factors can affect the isotopic signatures in fossils, and alternative explanations for the observed patterns cannot be entirely ruled out. The evolution of pliosaurs must be understood in the context of broader changes in marine ecosystems throughout the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. The Mesozoic oceans were dynamic environments with changing sea levels, shifting ocean currents, evolving marine communities, and periodic environmental crises. Pliosaurs both influenced these ecosystems and were shaped by them in a complex interplay of ecology and evolution. The Middle Jurassic period, roughly 174 to 163 million years ago, saw the diversification of pliosaurs into multiple distinct lineages. This diversification coincided with rising sea levels and the creation of extensive shallow seas that covered portions of the continents. These epicontinental seas provided new habitats and supported rich marine communities, creating opportunities for predatory specialization. Different pliosaur lineages evolved slightly different adaptations, probably reflecting specialization for different types of prey or different hunting environments. Some lineages developed relatively longer, more gracile skulls, suggesting a focus on faster, more agile prey like fish and squid. Others evolved shorter, more robust skulls with massive jaw muscles, indicating specialization for taking on large, heavily built prey like other marine reptiles. This pattern of ecological diversification within a successful group is common in evolution. When a new body plan or lifestyle proves successful, natural selection tends to produce multiple variations on the theme, each adapted to slightly different ecological niches. The result is adaptive radiation, the evolution of diverse forms from a common ancestor. The pliosaurs underwent such irradiation during the Middle and Late Jurassic, spreading across the world's oceans and adapting to a variety of marine environments. The Late Jurassic, approximately 163 to 145 million years ago, represents the peak of pliosaur diversity and abundance. Fossils from this time period have been found on every continent except Antarctica, though the poor fossil record from Antarctica means that pliosaurs probably lived there too. The climate was warm, sea levels were high, and marine productivity was apparently high, supporting complex food webs with multiple large predators. During this time, pliosaurs shared the oceans with a diverse array of other marine reptiles. The ichthyosaurs were at their peak, with numerous species ranging from small, fish-like forms to giants exceeding 15 meters in length. The plesiosaurs were diverse and abundant, with both small and large species occupying various ecological niches. marine crocodilians were present in coastal and shallow marine environments. Sea turtles had evolved and were beginning to diversify. This rich community of marine reptiles, combined with diverse fish, sharks, ammonites, belemnites, and other invertebrates, created an ocean ecosystem of remarkable complexity. In such a crowded ecosystem, competition for resources would have been intense. The multiple lineages of large marine predators must have partitioned the available resources in some way to coexist. As mentioned earlier, differences in hunting strategies, prey preferences, and habitat use would have reduced direct competition. Pliosaurs, with their ambush hunting strategy and preference for large prey, occupied a particular ecological niche that differed from the pursuit-hunting ichthyosaurs or the possibly more opportunistic plesiosaurs. The transition from the Jurassic to the Cretaceous period, approximately 145 million years ago, brought significant changes to global ecosystems. Sea levels, which had been very high during the late Jurassic, began to fall. The supercontinent of Pangaea continued to fragment, with the Atlantic Ocean widening and the various continental pieces beginning to move toward their modern positions. These geological changes affected ocean circulation, climate patterns, and the distribution of marine habitats. Pliosaurs survived this transition and continued to thrive during the early Cretaceous, roughly 145 to 100 million years ago. Some lineages went extinct, but others persisted and new forms evolved. The early Cretaceous saw the appearance of some of the largest pliosaurs, including the massive Kronosaurus previously discussed. These giants represented the culmination of trends toward increasing size and power that had characterized pliosaur evolution throughout the Jurassic. However, the early Cretaceous also saw the beginning of changes that would eventually lead to the decline of pliosaurs. New groups of marine predators were evolving and diversifying. Sharks, which had been relatively minor components of Mesozoic marine ecosystems, were beginning to evolve more advanced forms. The earliest representatives of modern shark groups were appearing, though they were still small compared to their later descendants. More significantly, a new group of marine reptiles was rising to prominence, the mosasaurs. Mosasaurs were relatives of modern monitor lizards that had adapted to marine life. Early mosasaurs were small and probably occupied coastal environments, but they were evolving rapidly. Their body plan, with a long, flexible body, powerful tail for propulsion, and relatively large, tooth-filled jaws, proved highly successful. Over millions of years, mosasaurs would grow to enormous size and spread throughout the world's oceans. During the Middle Cretaceous, roughly 100 to 93 million years ago, pliosaurs and mosasaurs coexisted in the oceans. Initially, pliosaurs were still the dominant large predators, but mosasaurs were increasing in diversity and size. The fossil record from this period shows both groups well represented, suggesting that they were successfully partitioning resources and avoiding excessive competition. The relationship between pliosaurs and mosasaurs during this time period is fascinating to consider. Did they compete directly, or did they occupy sufficiently different niches that they could coexist without significant conflict? The body plans of the two groups differed substantially. Pliosaurs, as we've discussed extensively, relied on powerful flippers and short, explosive bursts of speed for ambush hunting. Mosasaurs used tail-powered swimming and were probably more adapted for sustained swimming and pursuit hunting, somewhat like the ichthyosaurs. These different locomotor styles would have resulted in different hunting strategies and different prey preferences. Pliosaurs likely continued to specialize in ambushing large, slow-moving prey, while mosasaurs might have focused more on faster, more agile prey that could be run down through pursuit. This difference could have allowed the two groups to coexist with limited competition, at least initially. However, as mosasaurs continued to evolve and diversify, some lineages began to grow to very large sizes, rivaling and eventually exceeding the size of the largest pliosaurs. These giant mosasaurs, which appeared during the late Cretaceous, would have had dietary requirements and hunting strategies that increasingly overlapped with those of pliosaurs. This growing overlap may have intensified competition between the two groups. The late Cretaceous period, from approximately 93 to 66 million years ago, saw dramatic changes in marine ecosystems. The mosasaurs diversified explosively, evolving into numerous species adapted to a wide range of marine environments and feeding strategies. Some mosasaurs specialized in eating ammonites, developing specialized teeth for crushing shells. Others became apex predators capable of taking on virtually any prey. The largest mosasaurs exceeded 15 meters in length and were formidable predators by any standard. During this same period, pliosaurs declined. The fossil record shows decreasing diversity of Pliosaur species and fewer fossil finds overall. By the middle of the late Cretaceous, Pliosaurs had apparently disappeared entirely from the fossil record, though the exact timing of their extinction is difficult to pin down due to gaps in the fossil record. The most recent definitive Pliosaur fossils date to approximately 80 to 90 million years ago, meaning that Pliosaurs vanished from the oceans some 20 to 30 million years before the final mass extinction event that ended the Cretaceous period. What caused the decline and eventual extinction of the Pliosaurs? This question has been debated among paleontologists, and the answer is likely complex, involving multiple interacting factors rather than a single simple cause. Competition with mosasaurs is frequently cited as a major factor. As mosasaurs diversified and some lineages evolved body sizes and predatory capabilities similar to those of pliosaurs, the two groups would have competed increasingly for the same resources. In this competition, mosasaurs may have had certain advantages. Their tail-powered swimming was potentially more energy efficient than flipper-powered swimming, allowing them to cover larger ranges in search of prey. Their more flexible bodies might have made them more maneuverable, an advantage when pursuing evasive prey, and their tooth replacement system, which continuously produced new teeth throughout life, may have been more efficient than the slower tooth replacement seen in pliosaurs. Environmental changes during the Cretaceous period may also have contributed to pliosaur decline. Sea levels fluctuated significantly during this time, and the shallow epicontinental seas that pliosaurs seemed to favor expanded and contracted accordingly. When these seas retreated during periods of lower sea level, prime pliosaur habitat would have been reduced, potentially fragmenting populations and making it harder for these large predators to find sufficient prey. Ocean chemistry and productivity also changed during the Cretaceous. Periods of ocean anoxia, when oxygen levels in deep and mid-depth waters dropped severely, became more frequent. While pliosaurs, as air-breathing animals, were not directly affected by low oxygen in the water, these anoxic events would have affected their prey and the overall marine ecosystem structure. Reduced marine productivity in some regions might have limited prey availability, making it harder for large predators to survive. Climate change may have played a role as well. The Cretaceous climate was generally warm, but it was not stable. There were periods of cooling and warming, changes in ocean circulation, and shifts in the distribution of warm and cool water masses. Pliosaurs, if they were indeed dependent on maintaining elevated body temperatures, might have been particularly sensitive to these temperature changes. Cooling episodes could have stressed pliosaur populations, reducing reproductive success and increasing mortality. Changes in prey communities might have been equally important. The late Cretaceous saw significant evolution in fish communities, with many modern fish groups appearing and diversifying. These newer fish species might have been faster or more agile than the fish available earlier, making them more difficult prey for ambush predators like pliosaurs. Similarly, changes in marine reptile communities, the decline of some ichthyosaur and plesiosaur groups, might have reduced the availability of the large-bodied prey that pliosaurs specialized in hunting. Disease and parasitism could have contributed to pliosaur decline, though this is difficult to test with fossil evidence. The introduction of new pathogens or parasites, perhaps carried by the expanding mosasaur populations or evolving in response to changing environmental conditions, could have impacted pliosaur health and survival. Modern examples show that disease can have devastating effects on wildlife populations, particularly when a novel pathogen encounters a population with no prior exposure or immunity. Reproductive factors may also have been involved. Large-bodied animals with long generation times and low reproductive rates are generally more vulnerable to population decline than smaller, faster reproducing species. If pliosaurs had relatively low reproductive rates, as seems likely for such large animals, their populations might not have been able to recover from increased mortality or reduced reproductive success caused by environmental changes or competition. It's important to recognize that these factors would not have operated in isolation. Instead, they would have interacted in complex ways, potentially reinforcing each other. For example, environmental change might have reduced prey availability, which would have intensified competition with mosasaurs, while simultaneously reducing pliosaur reproductive success. Stressed populations might have become more vulnerable to disease. Fragmented populations resulting from habitat loss might have suffered from inbreeding and reduced genetic diversity, further impairing their ability to adapt to changing conditions. The extinction of pliosaurs represents one of many examples of turnover in marine ecosystems during the Mesozoic era. Throughout this long period, different groups of marine predators rose to dominance and then declined, replaced by new groups with different adaptations. This pattern reflects the dynamic nature of evolution and ecology. No single adaptation or body plan remains optimal indefinitely. As environments change and new competitors and prey species evolve, different traits become advantageous and previously successful groups can find themselves at a disadvantage. The disappearance of pliosaurs left a vacancy in marine ecosystems, the niche of large, powerful ambush predator. The mosasaurs filled some aspects of this role, though with a somewhat different hunting strategy. Other marine predators, including large sharks and possibly some species of marine crocodilians, may have also expanded into ecological space formerly occupied by pliosaurs. The resulting ecosystems were different in composition and structure from those of the Jurassic and early Cretaceous, even though they may have functioned in broadly similar ways. The end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, brought a catastrophic event that reshaped life on Earth. An asteroid approximately 10 kilometers in diameter struck the Yucatan Peninsula, releasing energy equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons. The impact and its aftereffects, including massive fires, a global cloud of dust and aerosols that blocked sunlight, dramatic temperature swings, and ocean acidification, caused a mass extinction that eliminated approximately 75% of all species on Earth. This event is famous primarily for ending the reign of the non-avian dinosaurs, but it also devastated marine ecosystems. The mosasaurs, which had replaced pliosaurs as the dominant marine predators, went extinct. So did the plesiosaurs, which had survived alongside and then outlasted their pliosaur cousins. The ammonites, which had been abundant in Mesozoic seas for hundreds of millions of years, vanished entirely. Many groups of fish and marine invertebrates suffered severe losses, but pliosaurs were already gone by this time. They had disappeared from the fossil record some 20 to 30 million years earlier, during what seemed to be a more gradual ecological transition rather than a catastrophic event. In a sense, the pliosaurs missed the final catastrophe, having already succumbed to the slower but ultimately equally fatal pressures of changing environments and evolutionary competition. The legacy of pliosaurs extends beyond their own existence. As apex predators for nearly 80 million years, they shaped the evolution of their prey and competitors. The selective pressure exerted by pliosaur predation would have favored faster, more agile, more alert prey species. Defensive adaptations in prey animals, stronger shells in ammonites, faster swimming in fish, better sensory capabilities in other marine reptiles may have evolved partly in response to pliosaur predation. Similarly, competition with pliosaurs may have influenced the evolution of other marine predators. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and early mosasaurs all coexisted with pliosaurs at various times, and the need to avoid direct competition may have driven these groups to specialize for different prey or different hunting strategies. In this way, pliosaurs helped shape the structure and diversity of Mesozoic marine ecosystems, even beyond their direct effects as predators. The study of pliosaurs also contributes to our broader understanding of evolution and ecology. These animals demonstrate the power of natural selection to produce highly specialized forms exquisitely adapted to particular lifestyles. Every feature of pliosaur anatomy, the massive skull, the powerful flippers, the streamlined body, the sophisticated sensory systems, represents millions of years of incremental improvement through natural selection. Yet pliosaurs also demonstrate the limitations of specialization. Adaptations that are highly advantageous under one set of conditions can become liabilities when conditions change. Modern conservation biology increasingly recognizes that specialized species are often more vulnerable to extinction than generalists. Highly specialized species depend on specific environmental conditions, prey species, or habitats. When these requirements are no longer met due to environmental change, specialized species may lack the flexibility to adapt. Pliosaurs were supremely adapted to their role as large ambush predators in Mesozoic oceans. When environmental changes and competition from mosasaurs altered the conditions that had favored this lifestyle, pliosaurs apparently could not adapt quickly enough to survive. This lesson from deep time has relevance for modern conservation. Many of today's apex predators, great white sharks, orcas, polar bears, tigers, are highly specialized and potentially vulnerable to rapid environmental change. Understanding the fate of ancient specialized predators like pliosaurs may help us better protect their modern equivalents. The discovery and study of pliosaur fossils has a fascinating history in itself. The first Pliosaur fossils were discovered in the early 19th century in England during the initial decades of paleontology as a scientific discipline. These early discoveries were often fragmentary and poorly understood. The first specimens were sometimes confused with other marine reptiles or even with dinosaurs, reflecting the limited understanding of Mesozoic life that existed at the time. As more fossils were discovered and scientific understanding advanced, the distinctiveness of pliosaurs became clear. By the late 19th century, paleontologists recognized pliosaurs as a distinct group of marine reptiles, different from both plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs. The name pliosaur was formally introduced, derived from Greek words meaning more lizard, reflecting the group's reptilian nature. The early 20th century saw continued discoveries of pliosaur fossils, particularly in Europe. Specimens from England, France, Germany, and Russia expanded scientific knowledge of the group's diversity and distribution. However, many of these early specimens were incomplete, consisting of isolated bones or partial skeletons. The lack of complete specimens limited what could be learned about pliosaur anatomy and biology. The mid-20th century brought new discoveries from other parts of the world. The spectacular Kronosaurus specimens from Australia, discovered in the 1920s and 1930s, revealed pliosaurs from the southern hemisphere and demonstrated that these animals had achieved a nearly global distribution. Later discoveries in South America, North America, and elsewhere confirmed this worldwide presence. Recent decades have seen an acceleration in pliosaur research, driven by new discoveries, new analytical techniques, and renewed interest in marine reptile evolution. The discovery of the remarkably complete skull in Dorset in 2023, mentioned at the beginning of this documentary, exemplifies the continuing potential for spectacular finds. This specimen, with its exceptional preservation and completeness, has provided unprecedented insights into pliosaur anatomy and function. Modern analytical techniques have revolutionized what can be learned from pliosaur fossils. CT scanning allows paleontologists to examine the internal structure of bones and skulls without damaging the fossils. This has revealed details of brain structure, inner ear anatomy, blood vessel patterns, and other features that were previously inaccessible. Computer modeling and finite element analysis enable testing of hypotheses about bite force, swimming mechanics, and other aspects of pliosaur biology that cannot be observed directly in fossils. Geochemical techniques, including the isotope analysis mentioned earlier, provide information about diet, habitat, and physiology. Ancient DNA analysis, which has been successfully applied to some fossils, has not yet yielded results for pliosaurs due to the age of the specimens. DNA generally does not survive more than 1 million years or so, and pliosaurs are orders of magnitude older. However, other biomolecules, particularly proteins, can survive much longer, and there is hope that protein analysis of pliosaur fossils might someday provide additional insights into their biology and evolutionary relationships. The application of phylogenetic analysis, the study of evolutionary relationships based on shared characteristics, has clarified the relationships among different pliosaur species and between pliosaurs and other marine reptile groups. These analyses have revealed that pliosaurs form a distinct evolutionary group within the broader Sauropterygia, more closely related to plesiosaurs than to any other marine reptile group. Within pliosaurs, several distinct lineages have been identified, each with its own evolutionary history and adaptations. One interesting finding from phylogenetic studies is that gigantic size evolved multiple times independently within the pliosaur family. Rather than all large pliosaurs descending from a single large ancestor, it appears that different pliosaur lineages evolved large size independently. This pattern suggests that strong selective pressure favored large size in marine predators during the Mesozoic, leading multiple lineages to converge on similar solutions. The mechanics of fossilization itself provides interesting insights into pliosaur biology and death. For a pliosaur carcass to become fossilized, a specific sequence of events had to occur. First, the animal had to die in or near an environment where burial was likely, typically an area with steady sediment deposition. The carcass had to avoid being completely consumed by scavengers. It needed to be buried relatively quickly, before the bones were scattered by currents or decay caused the skeleton to fall apart. And the chemical conditions in the sediment had to be appropriate for mineralization, the replacement of bone tissue with minerals that preserves the structure as a fossil. Each of these requirements represents a filter, eliminating the vast majority of dead animals from the fossil record. For every pliosaur that became fossilized, thousands or millions died without leaving any trace. The specimens we have represent a tiny biased sample of all the pliosaurs that ever lived. This sampling bias must be kept in mind when interpreting the fossil record. Despite these limitations, the pliosaur fossil record is actually quite good compared to that of many ancient organisms. Marine environments, particularly those with steady sediment deposition, are generally favorable for fossilization. The large, dense bones of pliosaurs were more resistant to decay and destruction than the remains of small animals or those with delicate skeletons, and pliosaurs were relatively common animals for much of the Mesozoic, increasing the chances that at least some individuals would be fossilized. The geographical distribution of pliosaur fossils reflects both the distribution of the living animals and the availability of appropriate rock formations from the right time periods. Europe, particularly England and France, has produced numerous specimens because it has extensive outcrops of Jurassic and early Cretaceous marine sediments that are readily accessible and have been studied intensively for nearly 2 centuries. Australia, Russia, and parts of South America have also yielded important specimens, expanding our understanding of pliosaur diversity and distribution. Interestingly, relatively few pliosaur fossils have been found in North America, despite extensive marine sediments from the appropriate time periods. This probably doesn't mean that pliosaurs were absent from North American waters. More likely, it reflects sampling bias. Perhaps the sediments that have been most intensively searched don't happen to be from the environments where pliosaurs were most abundant, or perhaps pliosaur fossils are present but haven't been found yet. The discovery of even a single good North American pliosaur specimen would significantly expand our understanding of the group's distribution. The preparation and study of pliosaur fossils requires specialized expertise and considerable patience. When a fossil is discovered, it is often still embedded in rock matrix. The process of removing this matrix, called preparation, can take hundreds or even thousands of hours of painstaking work with small tools, carefully removing rock grain by grain while preserving every detail of the fossil. Modern preparation techniques include the use of weak acids to dissolve limestone matrix, air abrasives for precise work, and even vibrating tools for removing harder rock. Once prepared, a pliosaur fossil becomes available for scientific study. Measurements are taken, photographs and drawings are made, and comparisons are drawn with other specimens. If the fossil represents a new species, a detailed scientific description must be published, providing all the information necessary for other scientists to recognize and identify the species. This description becomes the permanent scientific record, defining that species for all future research. Museum collections around the world house pliosaur specimens that serve as reference material for researchers. The Natural History Museum in London, the Museum of Natural History in Paris, the Australian Museum in Sydney, and numerous other institutions maintain important pliosaur collections. These collections are not static repositories. They are active research resources, continually being re-examined as new techniques and questions emerge. Public displays of pliosaur fossils serve an important role in education and outreach. A mounted pliosaur skeleton or skull in a museum gallery can convey the magnificence of these animals in a way that words and pictures cannot match. The sheer size, the massive teeth, the robust construction all become viscerally apparent when standing before an actual fossil. These displays inspire wonder and curiosity, potentially sparking interest in paleontology, evolution, and natural history in visitors of all ages. The scientific questions surrounding pliosaurs continue to evolve as new discoveries are made and new analytical techniques become available. Current research focuses on several key areas. One major area of investigation involves refining our understanding of pliosaur diversity and evolutionary relationships. As new specimens are discovered and existing specimens are re-examined with modern techniques, the picture of how different pliosaur species are related to each other and how they evolved over time becomes clearer. Another active area of research concerns pliosaur biomechanics and functional morphology. Computer modeling of swimming mechanics, bite force, and hydrodynamics provides increasingly sophisticated understanding of how these animals moved and fed. These models can be tested and refined as new fossil discoveries provide additional anatomical details or as our understanding of the relevant physics and engineering principles improves. Paleoecology, the study of ancient ecosystems, represents another vibrant research area. By examining the full suite of organisms found in association with pliosaur fossils and analyzing the environmental indicators preserved in the same rocks, scientists can reconstruct the ecosystems in which pliosaurs lived. This research helps us understand not just the animals themselves, but their ecological roles and interactions with other species. Questions about pliosaur physiology remain active topics of research. The debate over whether pliosaurs were purely ectothermic or had some degree of elevated body temperature continues, with new evidence from geochemical analysis, bone histology, and comparative physiology contributing to the discussion. Related questions about metabolic rate, growth rate, and longevity are similarly active areas of investigation. The extinction of pliosaurs, and particularly the question of why they disappeared while mosasaurs thrived, continues to attract research attention. Understanding this transition requires integrating evidence from multiple sources: the fossil record of both groups, environmental indicators from the same time period, and theoretical considerations about competition and adaptation. Recent work has focused on comparing the ecological capabilities of pliosaurs and mosasaurs, seeking to identify potential competitive advantages that might explain the outcome of their interaction. Looking to the future, new technologies promise to further expand our understanding of pliosaurs. Advanced imaging techniques, including synchrotron scanning, can reveal details of fossil structure at microscopic scales. Improved geochemical analytical methods may be able to extract more information from fossil bones about ancient environments and physiology. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are beginning to be applied to paleontological questions, potentially identifying patterns in large datasets that might not be apparent to human researchers. Perhaps most importantly, there is every reason to expect that significant new pliosaur fossils remain to be discovered. Much of the world's surface has never been systematically searched for fossils. Erosion continually exposes new rock surfaces, creating opportunities for new discoveries. And even in well-studied areas like the Jurassic coast of England, exceptional specimens like the 2023 skull discovery continue to be found. Each new discovery has the potential to answer old questions and raise new ones, continuing the process of scientific discovery. The story of pliosaurs resonates beyond scientific interest. These animals capture the imagination because they represent something fundamental: power, mystery, and the deep history of life on Earth. They embody the concept of sea monster that appears in mythologies around the world, though they were not mythical but real, living, breathing animals that dominated ancient oceans. In many ways, pliosaurs were the culmination of reptilian evolution in marine environments. Over millions of years, natural selection refined them into supremely effective predators, perfectly adapted to their ecological role. Every aspect of their anatomy and behavior reflected this adaptation. They were evolutionary masterpieces, testimony to the power of natural selection to create complex, integrated biological systems. Yet their extinction reminds us that no adaptation, however perfect for its time, guarantees survival. Environments change, new competitors arise, and what was once optimal becomes obsolete. The same evolutionary processes that created the pliosaurs ultimately led to their replacement by other forms. This is not a failure of evolution, but rather its essential character, a constant process of change and adaptation, with no permanent solutions and no final end points. For humanity, the story of pliosaurs offers several important lessons. First, it demonstrates the reality of deep time, the vast stretches of history before human existence, when the Earth was dominated by very different life forms. Pliosaurs ruled the oceans for nearly 80 million years, a span of time almost incomprehensibly long from a human perspective. Their rise, reign, and fall all occurred in a world utterly alien to our experience, yet thoroughly documented in the fossil record. Second, pliosaurs illustrate the interconnectedness of life and environment. These animals didn't exist in isolation, but as parts of complex ecosystems. Changes in ocean chemistry, climate, prey communities, and competitor populations all affected pliosaur survival. This web of interdependence, visible in the ancient past, continues to characterize life on Earth today. Modern ecosystems are no less complex or interconnected than those of the Mesozoic, and modern species are no less subject to environmental pressures. Third, the extinction of pliosaurs, and indeed the multiple turnovers in marine ecosystems throughout the Mesozoic, demonstrates that change is the only constant in the history of life. No ecosystem remains static indefinitely. No species lasts forever. Adaptation is a continuous process, not a goal that can be achieved and then maintained. This dynamism is both the creative force that generates biodiversity and the harsh reality that ultimately dooms every species to extinction. Finally, pliosaurs remind us of our responsibility as the current dominant species on Earth. Humans now exert influence over global ecosystems on a scale that rivals or exceeds any previous species. The decisions we make about how to manage resources, protect habitats, and address environmental challenges will shape the future of life on Earth. The fossil record, including the story of Pliosaurs, provides context for these decisions. It shows us what has worked in the past, what has failed, and what the long-term consequences of ecological disruption can be. The continuing scientific study of Pliosaurs represents more than academic interest in extinct animals. It is part of the larger project of understanding life on Earth, how it originated, how it diversified, how it responds to environmental change, and what factors determine success or failure. Every discovery, every analysis, every insight contributes to this understanding. And this understanding, in turn, informs how we think about modern biodiversity and how we approach the challenges of conservation and environmental management. The magnificence of pliosaurs lies not just in their size and power, but in what they represent. They are windows into a vanished world, evidence of the amazing diversity that evolution can produce, and reminders of the impermanence of all living things. They were masters of their domain for millions of years, perfectly adapted apex predators that dominated Mesozoic oceans. Yet they are gone, replaced by other forms. They reign a chapter in Earth's history rather than an ongoing reality. Standing before a pliosaur skull in a museum, or examining detailed illustrations of these animals in action, it's easy to imagine the ancient seas they once ruled. Picture the dim underwater light filtering down from above, illuminating schools of fish and the streamlined forms of ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs. Below, in the darker depths, a massive pliosaur hangs motionless, its large eyes scanning the waters above, its sensitive snout detecting the faint pressure waves from potential prey. The ocean seems peaceful, almost quiet. Then, in an explosion of power, the pliosaur strikes. The massive flippers drive the multi-ton body upward with astonishing speed. Water rushes past the streamlined form as the predator accelerates toward its target. The prey, whether an ichthyosaur or a large fish, has only seconds to react, but escape is impossible. The pliosaur's jaws open wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth. They slam shut with bone-crushing force, and the struggle is over almost before it begins. The ocean's supreme predator has fed once more. This scene, repeated countless times over nearly 80 million years, played out in oceans around the world. From the warm, shallow seas covering parts of Europe to the deeper waters off ancient Australia, from the northern seas near the Arctic to the southern waters around Antarctica, pliosaurs hunted, fed, reproduced, and died. They were integral parts of their ecosystems, shaping the evolution of their prey and competing with other predators for resources. But eventually the world changed. The ecological conditions that had favored pliosaurs for so long shifted. New predators arose. Prey communities evolved, environmental conditions fluctuated, and gradually over millions of years the pliosaurs declined. The last individual of the last species died sometime in the late Cretaceous, perhaps 90 million years ago, perhaps somewhat earlier. With that death, one of the great success stories in the history of life came to an end. Yet the story doesn't truly end there. The fossils remain, preserved in stone, waiting to be discovered. Each fossil is a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of information about what these animals were like and how they lived. Scientists continue to study these fossils, extracting ever more information through new techniques and new questions. And the public continues to be fascinated by these magnificent predators, ensuring that pliosaurs, though long extinct, remain a vibrant part of human culture and scientific inquiry. The legacy of the pliosaurs endures in the rocks that contain their fossils, in the scientific knowledge we've gained from studying them, and in the inspiration they provide to scientists and enthusiasts alike. They stand as testament to the incredible diversity that evolution has produced on our planet, to the power of adaptation, and to the ultimate impermanence of all species. As we face the environmental challenges of the 21st century, the lessons from pliosaurs and other extinct organisms become increasingly relevant. The geological past is not just history, it is a laboratory where we can study the outcomes of different environmental scenarios and evolutionary experiments. The fossil record shows us that mass extinctions have occurred multiple times in Earth's history, that ecosystems can be profoundly restructured by environmental changes, and that even highly successful species can vanish when conditions shift beyond their ability to adapt. These lessons should inform how we think about modern biodiversity and conservation. The current extinction crisis, driven largely by human activities, is eliminating species at rates comparable to the great mass extinctions of the geological past. Many of the species being lost are apex predators, including marine predators that occupy ecological roles somewhat analogous to those once filled by pliosaurs. These modern predators are often highly specialized, adapted to specific conditions and prey types, and consequently vulnerable to rapid environmental change. Understanding what happened to pliosaurs, how they rose to dominance, how they adapted to changing conditions for millions of years, and ultimately how they failed to adapt to later changes, can help us better understand the challenges facing modern apex predators. It can inform conservation strategies, helping us identify which species are most vulnerable and what conditions are necessary for their long-term survival. Moreover, the story of pliosaurs reminds us that the Earth has a long history of biological change, and that the current state of ecosystems is not permanent or inevitable. The oceans that pliosaurs swam in were very different from modern oceans, yet they supported rich and complex ecosystems. After the pliosaurs and other Mesozoic marine reptiles went extinct, new groups of animals evolved to fill the resulting ecological vacancies. Modern oceans have their own distinctive character, dominated by very different organisms than those of the Mesozoic. This perspective, seeing the modern world as just one snapshot in a long history of change, can be both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it makes clear that humanity is not the center of Earth's history, but rather one recent arrival in a story spanning billions of years. Empowering because it demonstrates that life is resilient and adaptable, capable of recovering from even catastrophic disruptions given sufficient time. The pliosaurs are gone, but the study of these magnificent predators continues to yield insights and inspiration. Every new fossil discovery adds to our knowledge. Every new analysis refines our understanding. Every new generation of scientists brings fresh perspectives and techniques to the study of these ancient animals. And every person who encounters a pliosaur fossil or reconstruction has the opportunity to connect with deep time, to contemplate the vastness of Earth's history, and to appreciate the incredible diversity of life that evolution has produced. In the end, the story of the pliosaur is a story of adaptation, success, change, and ultimately extinction, a pattern that has characterized life on Earth since its beginning and will undoubtedly continue far into the future. These magnificent predators, perfectly engineered for their role in Mesozoic oceans, stand as reminders of both the power of natural selection to create remarkable forms and the inevitability of change. They ruled the ancient seas for nearly 80 million years, a reign of unparalleled success, yet even they could not last forever. As we conclude this exploration of pliosaurs, we're left with a sense of wonder at what these animals were and what their existence tells us about the history of life on Earth. From the first discoveries in the cliffs of England to the latest advanced analyses using cutting-edge technology, the study of pliosaurs has revealed a fascinating world, utterly different from our own yet connected to it through the unbroken chain of evolution and geological history. The ancient terror of the deep lives on in the fossil record, in scientific research, and in human imagination, a permanent reminder of the magnificent diversity that life on Earth has produced and the endless capacity for change that drives the evolutionary process forward through deep time.